Hello. Today I'm going to be talking with you about the Buddhist notion of impermanence. When I teach this in my classes, I write up on the board the word change. And I tell the students, Buddhism teaches that everything is subject to change. Everything changes. And the students all write that down and they're like, okay, and so they're ready for it on the test. And I guess that's fine. But in this basic idea of impermanence or change, there's a lot to unpack. And so we're going to look a little bit at what's involved with this idea. So we talk about this basic idea that everything in the universe, everything that exists is impermanent, is subject to change, is contingent, if you prefer. And this is really quite consistent with what scientists tell us, right? Whether we're talking about things at the molecular level, the atomic level, the quantum level, we know that those aren't just little fixed static balls that make up the world, right? There is motion, there is energy at that very basic level. And so there, everything is constantly changing. And even at the largest level, at the cosmic level, right? We know that the universe is not a fixed thing, but is an ever expanding, ever dynamic combination of energies and matter. And so scientists tell us that everything's changing. Nothing is permanent. Everything is contingent. And so that resonates with what Buddhism is saying. And so if we look around our lives, we see this as well, that when we look at the things that we see, we know that, yeah, they appear static, but they really are constantly in a state of flux. But the illusion, the problem that we have is we're under this illusion that they are static, that they are permanent things. And so we think of certain things as permanent. We think of ourselves as permanent things. There are some things that change, but there are some things that are fixed. But if you think about it, those things that we look around and see as static are actually quite dynamic, are in motion, right? A tree, right? So a tree looks like a static thing, but as you know, trees are growing, branches are dying, flowers and leaves appear and disappear. And so even trees are moving pretty slow unless they're in a windstorm, but they're moving. And the same could be said of mountains, right? Mountains aren't static, right? They are slowly changing shape and changing form. And the earth itself is not eternal, right? The earth came into existence and the earth will pass out of existence. And so everything is in motion, but we look at it and we don't see it that way. So there's an illusion that things are fixed. There's a very famous Zen teacher. He's the founder of Soto Zen by the name of Dogen. Dogen was a Japanese teacher, one of the greatest Buddhist teachers ever. And in the Shobo Genzo, which is this famous book that he wrote, he talks about mountains crawling. And it's an interesting image that he suggests, the idea of mountains crawling. It can be translated different ways, but that's the basic idea. And so here you have a picture of the Matterhorn. This is in Switzerland, and this massive just rock, right? And you look at that and you're like, wow, that is just big and fixed, right? But in reality, we know that it's not true. The Matterhorn in a million years will not look like that. A million years ago, it didn't look like that, let alone if we're talking about the standard of billions of years. And so can you look at something like the Matterhorn and see it moving? And he doesn't mean that you can actually see it changing shape, right? It's changing too slow for us to perceive, unless we got up really close to one small part of it and noticed that, yeah, one little pebble moved and slid down the slope, right? But can you, in your mind, see that this is not a permanent static thing, but is actually a thing in motion, that mountains crawl, right? That mountain ranges appear and disappear. And so this whole idea of moving beyond the illusion of seeing things as static and fixed and appreciating that everything ultimately moves. Okay, so if that's the case, you might say, that's interesting, and I can't really object to that, but so what? Who cares? Right? And a lot of people take this observation no further than that it's just a metaphysical statement about how things are constantly moving and in flux, and can't object to it, but what does it matter? The Buddhists would say that it matters an awful lot. That if you think about this, this has some really important implications. And so perhaps first we should start with the idea of the self. We perceive ourselves to be a fixed static thing. I perceive myself to have a soul or some sort of underlying permanence. In Hinduism, the notion is that of the Atma or the Atman, this fixed soul, and it was there when you were a baby, and it'll be there when you die. And in the West, we have the notion of it passing on into judgment and perhaps heaven or hell or purgatory. And in Hinduism, the idea of it passing on through cycles of reincarnation. But the Buddha said, no, there is no static fixed self or soul. There is no self. There is no Atman. Right? We perceive there to be some underlying me that is there, but in reality, there is nothing there. There's no fixed static self. And if you think through what that means, it's got some really interesting implications. And so the Buddha talked about it this way. He said that really what we are is made up of 5 aggregates or 5 skandhas. And these get translated different ways. But really what we have is we have form, right? We have our physical matter that makes up who we are. We've got cells and atoms that make up what we are. We have sensory perception. Right? When you touch something hot and there is a sensation that happens, that is also part of who we are. There's then perception, right? There's the sensory reaction, and then there's the perception when your brain says that was a hot thing, right? And so you have perceptions, and you have mental formations, right? You have mental formations and ideas that appear in your head. We also have consciousness. And so these 5 aggregates, these are what makes up who we are as human beings. And so the Buddha and later Buddhists are writing this millennia ago or developing these ideas for thousands of years, but it's completely consistent with what we see in modern neuroscience, right? We are in our brains. And what are our brains? Our brains are not a fixed thing. There's no ghost in the machine. There's no little man running the brain, right? Our brains are neurons. Our brains are made up of an immense network of nerves and synapses. So immense that we can't even comprehend it, but they are made out of physical matter. They're made out of biological matter, and nerves connect themselves in different ways and disconnect themselves in different ways. And so there is no static thing behind who we are. We are this amalgam of energies, these 5 aggregates that are constantly in flux, constantly in a state of motion. And so behind who and what we are is motion, is energy, but not a fixed and static thing. So you have no self. There's no self there. There's continuity, right? And in some sense, of course, there's a self. There was a little baby, how old am I now? 40 some years ago, named Jeff Mann, and that was me. And I'm still here, and hopefully in another 40 years or so, I'll still be around, and I'll be doing things, and that'll still be Jeff Mann. And so there is, in that sense, of course, some notion of self, but there is no underlying static thing that's me. So what is there? What is the self? Well, I think that you get a little bit of an insight if you think about a flame. So if I light this lighter, you have a flame, and I can keep the button down, and that flame will last for a while. And it may grow and it may shrink, and it's the same flame. But it'll eventually go out. But during the lifetime of that flame, was it a single thing, or was it energies? Was it motion? Was it change? Right? Was it some sort of combination of realities of the world? That's a horrible way to describe it, and I should have thought of a better way to describe that. But the idea of a flame is, yeah, there's a single thing there in one respect, but there's nothing static behind it. So all I am, all that I experience, all I have is this one moment. So me, when I think of myself, I am constantly changing moment to moment. Cells die, cells grow. I have new experiences, I forget things. And so my life is a series of infinitely small moments. And so if I can learn to understand that and appreciate that, then I stop hanging on to false notions of who I am and what I am. And so people very often make themselves miserable by thinking of themselves as a fixed thing that they must maintain. And so if you can see yourself living moment to moment, then that's really what you are. And that's going to have pretty profound implications if you think about what that means for your life. So let me give you an example of how this can play out. A year or so ago, I was having some serious health problems, and it was making me miserable. There was chronic pain that was part of it. And there were things that I was upset about, right? No one likes to be in chronic pain. But it also meant that there were things that I couldn't do. There were things that I had planned to do that I could no longer do. And I knew that I would be in pain the next day and the next day. And so when I would go through life thinking about that, thinking in the long term, it was miserable. But if I could say to myself, okay, this moment right now is who I am right now. And can I deal with this right now? And I could. Moment to moment, right? When I would walk from my car into the building, I'm like, okay, I can do this. I can live this moment right now. And then walking into my office, and then walking up the steps. And so if you go through life moment to moment, and when times are difficult, you find that you can live that way. But when you think of yourself as one whole thing for the long term, then it gets overwhelming. But you can live moment to moment. So there are other implications that follow from this as well. If nothing is static, if nothing is fixed, if nothing is eternal, then there's no God as well. There's no heaven, there's no eternal heaven or no eternal hell. Buddhism does have temporary heavens and hells, but there's no God. There might be the one thing that might not change is the truth of this statement. And so you can play certain games with that, whether capital T truth changes or not. But there's no God, there's no eternal being that oversees us. There's no Brahman, as you find in Hinduism. And so that's going to have some implications. And so this whole idea of not having a self, of everything being subject to change, everything being impermanent, of no ultimate eternal God, no eternal destiny for any of us. If you think through this and can incorporate it into your life, it's not that now you're happy, right? That's not the point. But it helps you view the world correctly. With that in mind, I just want to make one final point. In addition to mentioning where I am, I forgot to mention that at the start of the video. I'm here in Lumbini, right? You can see over my shoulder the stupa, and so this is the place where the Buddha was said to have been born. I forgot to mention that at the beginning. Nice lotus flowers, nice symbolism there. But I want to move on very quickly and wrap this up. If you take your understanding of the Four Noble Truths, right? The idea of to live is to suffer. The cause of suffering is desire. To overcome suffering, you must eliminate desire in the Eightfold Path. If you take the Four Noble Truths and think about them, and you take the observation of impermanence, and you can personally appropriate these, you're going to get some really good insight into what Buddhism is about. Because when you stop trying to hold on to things like they're permanent, then it makes it easier to overcome the suffering that we create for ourselves. People aren't permanent. Relationships aren't permanent. Things aren't permanent. And so if everything is impermanent, then we can start to appreciate that everything that we have and enjoy will someday get taken away from us. And yeah, that will hurt. But we don't live under the illusion that we're going to have things forever, and we can therefore hold on to them a little more loosely. At a very practical level, consider this. When you buy tires for your car, you don't plan to get a flat tire. Do you think that in your life you will never get a flat tire? That would be kind of unrealistic, right? We know that tires aren't perfect. They're pretty good these days, but they're not perfect. But in life, there's a good chance, there's a high probability you're going to get a flat tire. So when that happens in life, is your reaction at that time to say, oh no, these things were supposed to last forever, this wasn't supposed to happen, and to get all upset about it? Or to say, ugh, this sucks, I got a flat tire, but these things happen, tires aren't perfect, tires don't last forever, and deal with it. It's still a flat tire, but our reaction to it becomes very different when we perceive that the world is not all perfect and permanent and fixed, and we can't hold on to things as long as we like. So one thing I hope you take away from this is that if you can relate the idea of impermanence to the Four Noble Truths, you're going to have some good insight into what the Buddha wanted you to realize about your life. Thank you.